So, okay, now it's recording. Okay.
Boker Tov, everybody.
You've got to sign up for.
Okay.
You know what? I'm going to share mine. I can't make it much bigger
Okay.
than that.
You're all being recorded, all this chit chat. Okay. Boker Tov, thank you for inviting me to this very hallowed ground of Matan. When is an olive not an olive? That is the title of this shiur. You have to have some very basic arithmetic skills. Okay, very basic, to understand what we're going to be talking about. And so let's start by acknowledging that there is only one mitzvah d'oraita that involves eating in the whole year. Now, today, in the times when we don't have a Beit HaMikdash, and that is matzah. Matzah on Leil Seder is a mitzvah d'oraita. There is no other eating mitzvah which is a mitzvah d'oraita, a Torah law. All other mitzvot. So, maror, d'oraita or d'Rabbanan? Why is it d'Rabbanan? Because we're told al matzot umrorim yochaluhu. You have to. The Torah says you have to eat it with matzah and maror. So why isn't maror a d'oraita?
My mistake.
No, it's not your mistake. You were right. It is a d'Rabbanan, but I want to know why.
Yeah, I don't know.
Why is it only d'Rabbanan, the maror?
The question is that Pesach L'Dorot or only Pesach Mitzrayim?
Pesach L'Dorot. Okay,
Mhm.
so it's not d'oraita because of the pasuk that I said. Al matzot umororim yochaluhu. It shall be eaten with matzah and maror. What is it?
It's a Pesach Korban.
Korban Pesach. We
Okay.
can't eat the Korban Pesach because we don't have a Beit HaMikdash. And so therefore, the maror, which we're only commanded to eat with the Korban Pesach, is not a d'oraita. It's a d'Rabbanan. On the other hand, the matzah, you say to me the same thing. Well, it says, al matzot umrorim yochaluhu. You have to eat it with matzah and maror. So you'll say the same to me. We don't have a Korban Pesach. What about the matzah? The matzah has a separate mitzvah, doesn't it? The matzah is a mitzvah in the Torah that you have to eat. The matzah is a separate mitzvah. The mitzvah of eating the matzah with the Korban Pesach is a separate mitzvah to eating the matzah on its own, which we don't have with the maror. Okay, so and I'm not just talking about on Leil Seder. I'm talking about throughout the year. There's only one mitzvah d'oraita which involves eating today, and that is the matzah on Leil Pesach. Every other eating mitzvah is d'Rabbanan or minhag. Okay, so cheesecake on Shavuot is not a d'oraita. Okay, it's not even a d'Rabbanan, but it's a good minhag. It's okay. So why am I starting with that? Because it tells us that this is an extremely important thing. It's our one chance in the year to do a mitzvah d'oraita, a Torah law by eating something. So we have to be therefore extremely careful about doing it correctly. It's a d'oraita. You'll be aware that there is only one, possibly two parashiot of Kriyat Torah, of the reading of the Torah, which are d'oraita, when they are Zachor, and possibly, according to some, Para. Okay, Parashat Para. Some say Parashat Para is also d'oraita. But Parashat Zachor, everybody knows is d'oraita. And how does the Baal Koreh read Parashat Zachor? Very slowly, very clearly, enunciating every single syllable so that you make sure that you do it properly, because it is d'oraita. The same applies with eating matzah, particularly matzah, because you've got to do it correctly. It's a d'oraita. It's a Torah law. So that's the reason, background reason as to why we get hung up about how much matzah we need to eat on Pesach. Having said that, I'm going to discuss with you today how there has been an evolution of the amount of matzah that is required, in inverted commas, to be eaten on Pesach. And I'm going to demonstrate to you.
Sorry. What's the evolution? Surely it must have been the same from the start.
Well, you'll see. You'll see. That's a very good question. I'm glad you're here. Because you'll see that is not the case. It has evolved. I used that word advisedly. Let's see. You'll see how we go along. Now, first of all, everybody knows how much matzah you have to eat on Pesach. How much matzah do you have to eat on Pesach? A kazayit. Okay, and what does it mean?
Like an olive.
Like an olive. Okay, you have to eat the amount of matzah which is like an olive. Okay. Sorry? The volume of an olive. Okay, even better. The where's it from, by the way? Kazayit. Where do we all know it because we learned it in kindergarten, didn't we? But where's it from? Bet you don't know that. I didn't actually. It comes actually from a midrash. A midrash in Achrei Mot and Emor. The Torah Kohanim says there is no eating with less than a kazayit. Eating is a kazayit. If you don't eat a kazayit, it's as if you haven't eaten anything at all. Wow. Now, when is that important for us? Apart from Pesach. Yom Kippur, right? Because if you are somebody who can't fast because of medical reasons, you can eat something which is called pachot mi kashiur, less than around about a shiur. What is a shiur? Shiur, what is it? What we're having a shiur now, right? Shiur means a lesson, right? Doesn't really. Shiur means a measurement, right? So why is a lesson called a measurement? Because when you're in school, right, it's measurements 30 minutes or 40 minutes is a lesson, isn't it? And here our shiur will be an hour. So that's why it's called a shiur, right? Didn't know that. Right. So shiur means a measurement, right? Shiur means a measurement. So the pachot mi kashiur, if you eat less than the measurement, which means less than the amount that the Torah considers eating, then you haven't eaten. So somebody on Yom Kippur can't fast, can take a certain amount, which is less than the amount of being able to eat of a, we'll say for the sake of argument, a kazayit, an olive size, whatever that means, we'll see soon. Less than that, and you do that in a certain amount of time, because there's a shiur of time as well, how long you've got to eat this shiur in. So in other words, if you take your olive size of matzah and it takes you an hour to eat it, then you haven't done the job, because there is a shiur of time as well. There is a measurement of time that you have to eat this in. And there is a wide range of opinions on the time as well as the amount. Today, we're going to concentrate on the amount. I'll tell you the range of time later on, but I'm not going to go into the details of how they arrive at the range of time. Whereas I am going to go into the details of how we arrive at the amount of matzah we have to eat on Pesach. So, the answer to my first question is how much you have to eat on Pesach, everybody knows, is a kazayit, the amount which is like an olive, the volume of one. Everything is done by volume, not by weight. It's done by volume, which is a little bit tricky because you'll see when we come to the maror, volume's a little bit difficult to measure. But with matzah, it's a little easier. So we're talking about volume. So the first thing is, how much is the volume of an olive? I happen to have here a can of olives, which I shall just open. Oh, there we go. There's a nice olive. This one's got no pip in it. It's got a hole in it. Let's just show the camera. See? Yeah. Okay. An olive. Right. I'll put it in there so you can see. My hands don't get too sticky. Thank you very much. That'll be very handy. Never thought of that. Wasn't prepared. Okay. What is the volume in either milliliters or cubic centimeters, which is the same thing, of an average olive. That's a slightly smaller than average, I think, olive, but let's call that an average olive. An average olive, what is the volume of an average olive? Anyone want to have a guess? You think that's about 2 centiliters?
Looking at the
Oh,
cups,
no,
so
this-
cups
The
two-
cup is 2 centiliters up to that
That's-
line.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's the one.
So that column, that's equal to a centiliter is equal
To a mil.
gram, to a gram.
A centiliter is 20
Mil.
mil,
20
mil.
20
So
milliliters.
20 mil is up to there.
Yeah.
So bearing in mind that there's a big hollow in this, right, which you have to get rid of the hollow. You can't count the hollow as a, so I'm glad you gave me this because I'm going to squash it, right? Right? We're going to squash this, right? Because we can't count the air in the middle of it where the stones come out of as volume because we're not eating that air. So I've squashed that down now. How many of those olives do you think we could get up to? Really squashed in so there's no air to get up to there? 4, somebody said, right? 4. Now that would be a perfect guess because that line there is 20 centiliters or 20 mil. Okay.
Yeah.
And the average olive is 4 to 5 mil or 4 to 5 cc. So you would get 4 or 5 of those in that in that 20 centiliter thing. So bear that in mind. The average olive is 4 to 5 centimeters. Let's use 5 milliliters or cc. Let's use 5 because it's an easier
It's
number
like
to work with.
A teaspoon
Yeah,
is
like-
5. A teaspoon is 5.
Right. So it's like a teaspoon. If you like, a teaspoon of medicine, right? 5 mil. So okay, so that's the first thing I want you to remember, that the average olive is 5 mil or 5 cc, right? Okay, that's the first fact. Now, let's go right to as far an extreme as we can. And let's talk about somebody who is very famous and nobody would dream to argue with him about anything, but I'm going to. And that is the Chafetz Chaim. Okay, Chafetz Chaim, Rabbi of Radin, Yisrael Meir of Radin, wrote a book of Halacha called Mishnah Brura. How much does the Mishnah Brura say that you have to eat as a kazayit? Anybody know? 55 mil, right? According to the Mishnah Brura, you have to eat 55 mil. Okay, so in other words, 11 olives. Now, when is an olive not an olive? Okay, so how come the Mishnah Brura says you have to eat the size of 11 olives when we know that you have to eat the size of 1 olive? Okay, what are the possibilities?
The olives start changing size.
Olives have changed in size. That's a possibility. That back in the day, there were olives the size of footballs, right? Okay.
He might not have ever seen an olive.
He might not have ever seen an olive. As it so happens, he would have done because he lived in the 19th and 20th century, died in 1933. So he would have done. But that is a very, very important point, Judith, and we will come back to that in a minute. So he might not have known what an olive was, and he might have thought it was 11 times bigger than it was. And what other possibilities are there? Well, there's a possibility that what we're talking about is an olive which has been not something that you actually see. We can see an olive and we can smash it down and we can measure it. But you may have not seen one. I think the Chofetz Chaim would have done, but there will have been other poskim who will have never seen an olive and have had to work it out from first principles. And this is what I'm going to show you, how we've arrived at what we've arrived at and the differences between the poskim. And then you can decide actually what you want to do for yourselves at your own seder. Okay, so let's start with somebody who is probably equally in the top league as the Chofetz Chaim, somebody who is revered as the father of the yeshiva world, Reb Chaim of Volozhin. Anybody heard of him? Yeah, Reb Chaim of Volozhin was basically the founder of the great Volozhin yeshiva, the founder of the yeshiva movement. Okay, the yeshiva movement as we know it is really only about 200 years old. We think of, when you like me will have heard when you were in kindergarten that Yaakov Avinu ran off to the yeshiva of Shem Va'eva, right? When he was running away from Esav. Yeah, you heard that midrash? Yeah, everybody's heard that midrash. So I don't know about you, but I used to think of him, well, the Americans would have thought of Lakewood maybe, but I thought of Gateshead. I imagined Yaakov Avinu in Gateshead Yeshiva, right? That whole concept of the yeshiva as we know it today is only 200 years old. That's just as an aside. Anyway, Reb Chaim of Volozhin, top guy, right? First division. He says, you know what he says? How much an olive is? Not 55 cc. Amazing piece of, this is an amazing piece of information. Reb Chaim of Volozhin says that a kazayit is the size of an olive. Shock, horror. Reb Chaim of Volozhin says it is the size of an olive and therefore 5 cc. 1/11 of what the Chofetz Chaim says, what Mishnah Berurah writes. Okay, so don't let anybody tell you that there are no top drawer poskim who disagree with these very large shiurim. Okay, because there aren't. Because Reb Chaim of Volozhin is certainly somebody, as my rabbi in Manchester used to say, he's a Jewish man. You can rely on him. Yes.
You're saying about maybe he didn't know what an olive was. We were talking earlier. What he never saw. Some people may have never seen an olive.
Okay,
A person I know was a survivor and was coming over on the boat, and they kept feeding her what she said was shizifim, and she hated it, and she hated it. And she gets to Israel, and they want to give her a shizif, a nice sized plum. And she said, I can't eat those. They're terrible. Turned out they were feeding her olives on the boat,
Right.
black olives. And
Wow.
someone told her it was a shizif, and she believed it.
Right.
But that's a larger.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's a good point. Let's come to it in a minute. So we have a range so far of an olive size, 5 cc, to the Chofetz Chaim who says 55 cc. The average of all the Ashkenazi poskim is 28.8 cc. Okay, that's the average. And that is almost 6, probably around about 6 olives. So we've got Reb Chaim of Volozhin who says an olive, an average sort of shiur, which by the way is what the Chazon Ish uses. We're all used to saying, oh, that's a Chazon Ish shiur, which means, we always think, he's the biggest shiur. As it so happens, on Pesach, he uses a shiur of 28 cc. That's sort of in the middle, if you like. I mean, it's crazy to think that 6 times a kazayit is in the middle, but it is. And then you've got the poskim like the Mishnah Berurah who says 55. So how do we arrive at all of this? Okay. Let's first of all work out, how do we get to a situation where an olive is not an olive? Well, first of all, you have to say either the olives of then were much bigger, and why would the poskim think that? If they hadn't seen their own olives, and even if they had seen their own olives, why would they think that the olives of 3,000 years ago were 10 times the size or 5 times the size of the olives today? Why would they think that?
Maybe they're basing it on the Miraglim.
Yes, the Miraglim, exactly. The Miraglim.
Vision of this huge bunch of grapes.
Correct. We see it all the time, don't we? Because it's a symbol of the Ministry of Tourism here in Israel, of the Miraglim with these great big fruits, right? So it would be a reasonable assumption to think that the olives then, back in the time of the Miraglim at least, were bigger than they are today. So that would be a reasonable assumption based on that. So we also need a second assumption to arrive at the shiur that we have, this huge measurement. And that is that even if that's true, that we have to go according to the olives of the Meraglim and not the olives of today. That's another assumption we have to make to get to this Chofetz Chaim position. Okay, we have to, number one, the olives back then have to be huge. And number two, we have to use that huge size olive rather than our own. So let's look at both of those aspects. First one, were olives back then bigger than they were than they are now? Now, there is nowhere in the Torah where it tells you exactly how big they were. And anyway, that was a one-off thing that HaKadosh Baruch Hu made a nace, that the Meraglim would bring these beautiful fruits back to impress the folk back home, back in the desert. We can see from the standpoint of archaeology, there is clear evidence of the size of olives. How do we got clear evidence? Two ways we've got clear evidence. Number one, there are a number of places in Eretz Israel where they have found residue in archaeology, including olive pits, right? I don't mean pit as in you put things in, the pit that we've taken out of the middle of the olive, right? The stone. For example, where did they find tons of these things? Masada, correct. In Masada, they found loads of olive pits. And guess what? They're the same size as the ones we have today. Okay, so that's good evidence archaeologically. There is natural evidence. There are hundreds of olive trees, including in Eretz Israel, that are 2,000 years old. There are 7 trees, well, at least there were a few years ago, I don't know if there's still 7, with 10 years ago at least, there were 7 trees that are 3,000 years old. Imagine that. An olive tree, 3,000 years old, an olive tree, which is almost like from the time of Matan Torah. Amazing thought. And they're still giving fruit. And guess what? They're the same size, right? So archaeologically and botanically, there is evidence that the olives back then were the same size as olives now. And actually, when you think about the way things progress, you would expect the olives back then to be what? Smaller, because, you know, better nutrition and better pesticides and all the other garbage that we put on our stuff now makes the fruit bigger. So if anything, you'd expect them to be smaller, not larger. And there's no evidence at all that they were 10 times the size of our olives, 5 times the size of our olives, or even any bigger than our olives. Okay, so now you'll say to me, but yeah, but there are big olives and there are little olives. Okay, fair enough. Now, when we come to the Gemara in Mishnah, actually it's a Mishnah, not Gemara, in Kalim, if you want to look it up, it's Kalim 17, chapter 17, Mishnah 8, and it says very explicitly, the Kazayit of which they spoke, meaning the Chazal, is neither large nor small, but a medium-sized one, which is the Igori. It gives the name Igori, and it specifically says it's a medium-sized olive. Now, today we have the large olive would correlate with what we have today called the Shami olive, which is about 12 cc. The small olive would be the Melisi olive, which is about 1 cc. And the medium-sized olive would be the Suri and slightly larger Nabali strains. Suri is 2.5 to 3.5, and Nabali is 4 to 6. So let's take the 4 to 6. 4 to 6 is 5. That's what we're talking about. And that's the Mishnah in Kalim. When was the Mishnah written? 200, yeah, so 1,800 years ago. So 1,800 years ago, they were talking about medium-sized olives of 5 cc. Right, now, what about the development of this shiur? How did it get to the situation where we've got this range of 5 cc to 55 cc? How did it happen? Let's take a journey through history, through Jewish history. As you know, what we tend to do is we tend to put the greatest store on the oldest opinions. So Gemara, Mishnah, Gemara, followed by the Geonim, Rishonim, Achronim, and then anybody after the Achronim, anybody after the later commentators or poskim, they're called contemporary. Contemporary can be like 200 years old, but they're called contemporary. And the further back you go, generally speaking, the greater the authority, right? A Rishon, an Achron can't really argue with a Rishon. Doesn't sit well. So let's take a journey through here. We've seen that the Mishnah talks about a medium-sized olive. That's all it tells us, a medium-sized olive. We've now worked out that is probably about 5 cc. What about the Geonim? So very interesting, because only about 130 years ago, there was found 3 responsa from the time of the Geonim, which talks about this subject. And up until 130, 150 years ago, these responsa were not known. And Rav Sharira Gaon, who lived in Bavel around about 900 to about 1000, right? So that's sort of so about 1000 years ago. And he writes this, and I'll quote it to you. You asked me to explain if there is a weight given for the fig, olive, date, and other measurements in the weight of Arabic coins. And you explained that Rav Chilai Gaon clarified that the weight of an egg is 16 2/3 silver pieces. And you wondered if the others do not have an ascribed weight, why is the egg given one? And then he goes on to say, basically, that the reason we don't give a weight to an olive and a fig and a date is that everybody knows what an olive and a fig and a date looks like. Whereas an egg, there's all sorts of different eggs. There's chicken's eggs and there's other animals' eggs. There's ostrich eggs, right? Okay. But there aren't ostrich egg-sized olives or figs or dates. So the Gaonim, and then there's 3 other ones. There's Rav Chai Gaon, who was the son of Rav Sharira Gaon, and then another unknown Gaonic author say the same thing, that the measurement of these things of fig, olive, and date go according to the observer. So whatever it is that you see, that's what you see. Okay, so you see an olive, that's an olive. And how big's an olive? An olive is like an olive, right? But no problem. The Gaonim knew that. These Gaonim, where did they live? I just told you.
Babylon.
In Babylon. Babylon have olive trees? Yes.
Yeah.
Right. Babylon have olive trees. So Babylon have fig trees? Yes. Date trees? Yes. So you can go outside in your garden and see how big these things are. And the Gaonim are saying, I don't need to tell you how big an olive is, because it's an olive, right? Obvious.
But didn't they have chickens?
Well, they would have had chickens, but they would have had all sorts of different animals that lay eggs. Quail eggs, right? Quail eggs are that big. Ostrich eggs are that big. You've got to give if it had said a chicken egg or a specific brand of egg, then it would know. But because it didn't, it was talking about baked. The Gaonim say that the eggs were given a specific weight for that reason. And we don't have that reason for these things that are around us, olives, etc. Now,
I'm sorry. In the Gemara, doesn't it, when it's talking about an egg that's being laid, it doesn't ever say, like if it's on Shabbos.
Yeah, no, it doesn't.
It doesn't ever say
doesn't.
it's a chicken?
No, it's assumed to be a chicken. Yeah. But you'll see we're coming to the size of eggs in a minute. Okay, now let's go on to the Rishonim. So we've got the Geonim's opinion. Geonim say, goes according to the observer. You see it, you see it, you see what you see. The Sfaradim, the Rishonim of Sfarad, okay? Where is Sfarad? Southern Europe and Northern Africa, right? Climate? Mediterranean. Will they have had olive trees?
Yes.
Okay, absolutely. Now, who is the greatest Rishon of the Sfaradim? The Rambam. What does the Rambam say about a kazayit?
What do you write? Nothing.
Nothing. Glad you've done your homework. The Rambam says absolutely nothing about a kazayit, the size of a kazayit. Do you not find that surprising, given that we have said that this is a mitzvah deoraita and we've got to be like, super makpid that we do it? You'd have thought that the Rambam would have said how much you've got to eat, wouldn't you? And don't say a thing. Why not? It's obvious. It was obvious to the Rambam. An olive's an olive. What you talk? Don't drive me my sugar, right? Olive's an olive. But he does say, you can make an inference about how big the maximum size of a dried fig is. Okay, that's what he says. He says a dried fig is 1/3 of an egg. Now, I don't have a dried fig, but I do have an egg. Okay, there we go, everyone. I do have an egg. So anybody want to guess the volume of an average chicken's egg? This is an average chicken's egg, which was laid by my chickens, or actually my wife's chickens, to tell you the truth. And I boiled it, though. Okay, so this is an average chicken's egg.
10 to 15.
15 mils? No.
I go close to
Go on.
Stuff at Chaim's 55.
Close to, yeah. The average chicken's egg today, well, you've got large, medium, extra large. A medium chicken egg, I looked it up in Google, is given as 46 cc. Okay, so 9 times the size of our regular medium-sized olive. Okay, bear that in mind. That's another figure I want you to remember. So for the 2 figures I want you to remember are 5 mil for an average olive. Let's say 45 for an egg, because it's easy to work out with the maths. 45 for an average egg. Therefore, 1 olive is 1/9 of an egg. Agreed? Okay, good. Because so does the Rambam. Rambam says that a dried fig is 1/3 of an egg. Now, imagine a fig. I'm sorry I didn't have one. I wasn't organized enough to get a dried fig. But you can imagine a dried fig. You've all seen them, I guess. 3 times the size of an olive? No.
A dried fig.
A dried fig. Yeah. Yeah. About 3 times the size of an olive. That sound about right? Okay, so if that's about right, 1 olive is 1/3 of a fig, and a fig is 1/3 of an egg, makes an olive 1/9 of an egg. QED, we're on good source, so good. Okay, so that's what we can tell about the Rambam. Rambam says that that a dried fig is 1/3 of an egg. Now, the Gemara does tell us that the kazayis is smaller than a dried fig. That's what the Gemara tells us. It's smaller than a dried fig. So at this stage of our calculation, we now know that a kazayis is smaller than 1/3 of an egg. Okay, that's all we know. We don't know how smaller at this stage, according to the Gemara. Okay. Now, the inference of Rambam's view does not tell us anything about the absolute size of a kazayit, only that it must be less than 1/3 of an egg, because an olive is less than a fig, and a fig is 1/3 of an egg. So it must be less than 1/3 of an egg. Now, what then happened was that there was inflation. Inflation of the Rambam's view. The Rambam's view went from being that the olive must be less than 1/3 of an egg, because it's less than the size of a dried fig, to being it must be slightly less than a dried fig, which isn't true, but that's the opinion that was ascribed to him. And then we got more inflation, and it was then taken that what the Rambam meant, what was the kazayit, was equal to 1/3 of an egg, which is not what the Rambam infers. But that was what was given to be his improvement. Now, so how did that happen? So we don't know how much less than 1/3 of an egg the Rambam was talking about. And so we better take it as that as the upper limit. So this is the concept of being machmir to the most possible upper limit. The problem is that the truth is that it's not the case. And the Rambam never said that an olive is a third of an egg. He said an olive is less than the size of a fig. And the Gemara says a fig is a third of an egg. The Rambam didn't say anything about an olive because he could go outside in his garden and get one. And he was of the opinion of get on him, who said it goes according to the observer, which is why you don't find anything in the Rambam about what is a kazayit. Okay, so now if you look at another one of the authorities from Sfarad, the Rashba. The Rashba lived in the 13th century, and he says that 15 eggs, a bit of maths coming up here, 15 eggs are much more than 60 olives. Much more than 60 olives. Okay, so let's say he didn't say this, but let's say he said 15 eggs are 60 olives. How much would be an olive?
5.
A quarter of an egg, right? 15 eggs is 60. 60 divided by 15 is 4. So you would get 4 olives in an egg, according to the Rashba. But the Rashba doesn't say that. He says it's 15 eggs are much more than 60 olives. So that means that an olive must be much less than a quarter of an egg. Now, we know from our calculations that actually an olive is a ninth of an egg, which is, in fact, much less than a quarter of an egg. Okay, so the Rashba and the Rambam so far are consistent with the Geonim, right? And it's important to note that none of these authorities set out to specify how big is an olive. I'm using what they've said in other contexts to try and see what they really thought, because none of them spoke about it, because they took it for granted that the size of a kazayit was what it says on the tin, a kazayit, right? I like an olive. Now, what about the Rishonim of Ashkenaz? Where is Ashkenaz? Germany, Northern Europe, Germany, Northern France, Holland, Britain, okay, all this area of Northern Europe. Climate, cold, miserable, right? Not Mediterranean. Yeah, you had an olive tree in your garden, Mark? Mark did not have, despite what he may tell you, Mark did not have an olive tree in his garden in England, and neither did I. We had apple trees, we had all sorts of nice things, but not olive trees. So if you wanted to have an olive in Northern Europe, what did you have to do? Import them. Okay. How were olives imported to Northern Europe back in the day? In bottles of oil. The only import of olives was in oil, right? And that was an incredibly expensive delicacy, right? So first of all, the only olives that were imported were already squeezed olives in olive oil, and that was only for the very wealthy. Nobody imported olives to Northern Europe at that time, when talking at the time of the Rishonim. Okay, if you weren't able to import them, what would you then do? You wanted to know what an olive looked like. What would you do today? You wanted to know what an olive looked like. You Google it, right? And before Google, you take out a book, right? You take an encyclopedia. Did they have Google? The Rishonim have Google in Ashkenaz? No, they were a bit backward in Ashkenaz. In the Rishonim, they didn't have Google, and they didn't have Encyclopedia Britannica either, right? So they didn't know what this thing looked like. They had no idea. By the way, this is why there are other, inverted commas, mistakes from the Rishonim of Ashkenaz. For example, the animal of the tzvi. Tzvi is translated by all the Rishonim of Ashkenaz as a deer, when in fact it's a gazelle. Why can't it be a deer? Because there weren't any deer in Eretz Yisrael when the Torah was written, and it talks about a tzvi. Why did they say it was a deer? Because they didn't know what a gazelle was, right? And a deer, tzvi, was the fastest animal, right? The fastest animal in Northern Europe was a deer. So they called a tzvi a deer. Actually, the tzvi is a gazelle. There were no deer in Eretz Israel at that time. Another example, the nesher, translated by the Ashkenazi eagle, and it really was a vulture, okay, because there weren't eagles. There were no vultures in Northern Europe, and there were no eagles in Eretz Israel. So that's how you get mistakes creeping in. So you'll say to me, well, why don't we correct the mistakes? Well, there are some people, I like to put my hand up as one of them, we're trying to correct these mistakes, but you're working against a difficult situation because Masorah. But, you know, my view is if the Masorah is wrong and you can prove the Masorah is wrong, then create a new Masorah which is right. But that's another story.
People don't say that turkeys are not kosher.
Well, another, yeah,
They
turkey,
didn't see it.
because with birds you have to have a sign of kashrut. And if there's no turkeys, you can't say the sign of kashrut. Absolutely, there are certain people who say that. Okay, so the Rishonim of Ashkenaz didn't know what an olive looked like. So what do they have to do? They have to work it out for themselves. Now, there is a Gemara in Krisut 14a, if you want to look it up, that says that the throat can only hold no more than 2 olives, right? What that means, don't know exactly, but that's what it says. There's another Gemara in Yoma 80a, which says that the throat cannot hold more than a chicken's egg. Okay. Now, if you are an Acharon, or if you're a Rishon in Ashkenaz, and you don't know what an olive looks like, but you do know, because you know your Gemaras, you do know that the throat can hold 2 olives or a chicken's egg. You now have a calculation that tells you that an olive is half an egg. So we've gone from the truth, which is that an olive is 1/9 of an egg, to the Rashba, who says it's much less than 1/4 of an egg, to the Rambam, who says it's less than 1/3 of an egg, to the Rishonim of Ashkenaz, who say it is half an egg. You see how we've got this inflation going on here, right? So we're now up to half an egg, right? By the way, we'll stop there. That's where you get your average shiur of 28 cc. Okay, 28 cc, double it, what have you got? 56 cc. You've got a large egg. Why do you take a large egg? Because chas v'sholom, you should take a medium egg, you know, you have to be machmir on the large egg. And so why 28 cc and not 27.5? Chas v'sholom, you might measure it wrong, do a little bit more, right? Machmir. You get to 28 cc at the moment, half an egg, right? Not their fault. They didn't know any better. They worked it out very cleverly from the Gemara. They'd never seen an olive. Okay, now we've got a third place which doesn't work out altogether. Another Gemara in Eruvin, which discusses the amount of food required for an Eruv. You know that for an Eruv, you can't just stick a thingy around it, a wire around it. You've got to have food at the end of for Eruv Tchumim. If you want to go outside the Eruv, your 2,000 amud, you have to have a meal, right, at the end of the Eruv Tchumim. Okay, so Rabbi Shimon says that 2 meals are 2/9 of a kav. 1 kav is 24 eggs. Okay, I'll do the maths for you. According to Rabbi Shimon, 2 meals are 2/9 of a kav, which is 5 1/3 eggs. But we'll go with Rabbi Yochanan ben Barucha because his maths is easier. 2 meals are 1/4 of a kav. 2 meals are 1/4 of a kav. 1/4 of a kav is 1/4 of 24 is 6. So 2 meals are 6 eggs. Now, fine. Got that? 2 meals are 6 eggs. Another Gemara says that 2 meals are equal to 18 dried figs. How big is a dried fig? 1/3 of an egg. And that works according to Rabbi Yochanan, doesn't it? 6 eggs, 18 figs. Now, so 1 dried fig, therefore, according to Rabbi Yochanan, 1 dried fig would be, so according to Rabbi Shimon, 5 1/3 eggs are 18 dried figs. Okay, according to Rabbi Yochanan, 6 eggs are 18 dried figs. So 1 olive is less than 1/3 of an egg. Who said that? The Rambam. The Rambam. So this Gemara in Eruvin fits with the Rambam, who says that it's less than a third of an egg. And that's where the Rambam got his view from this Gemara in Eruvin. Okay, but he wasn't talking about olives. We've superimposed his opinion of olives on that. He didn't tell us about olives because he could go in the garden and look at it. Fine. Now then, so how do you reconcile a Gemara that says that works out that an olive is a third of an egg, according to Rabbi Yochanan, less than a third of an egg according to Rabbi Shimon, and a half an egg according to the two Gemaras that we've put together earlier on that says that a throat can hold an egg or 2 olives. Right? How do you do all of that? Okay, so we have to either say that olives are bigger, which we've already shown aren't. Maybe eggs were smaller. We know that olives haven't changed because I've just shown you the archaeological evidence and botanical evidence. What about eggs? Have eggs got smaller or bigger? If the egg has got smaller over the years, then it could well be that instead of it being a 1/9 of an egg, it's a half an egg. In other words, you would have eggs that would be that size. Right, 2 olives. Okay, won't make. There you go, 2 olives. Won't make much of a omelette, that would it? No. So maybe eggs. Maybe eggs have gotten much bigger or smaller than they were. So that's another thing we have to talk about. Right. Now, okay, let's move on now to the Shulchan Aruch. Okay. No, maybe we have to talk about the Re first. Hang on a minute. We have to talk about the Re first or afterwards. Okay, let's talk about the Re. The Re says, to me there is no difficulty, for I saw olives in Israel and Jerusalem, and even 6 were not as large as an egg.
Where are you reading from?
Top of about page 6. Another revealing statement comes from one of the Rishonim from the generation of the Rosh. He was addressing a question that arises from Hillel having eaten a kazayit each of matzah, mara, and charoset simultaneously. Remember, we've got to do this korech, right? So if you've got to do korech, what does korech consist of? A kazayit of matzah, a kazayit of maror, and a kazayit of charoset. Now, if you take these massive things, how are you going to get all of that? I'm going to show you what these sizes are in a minute. How long have I got? 5 minutes, Oive. Okay. Right. I might have to steal 5 minutes of your coffee time. Okay. So how are you going to do that? If you go on these massive shiurim of 55 cc, how are you going to do that? You can't. It's impossible. So he says, there's no difficulty. I saw what olives are. I was in Jerusalem, and I saw that even 6 olives were not as large as an egg. So this opinion here says less than a 1/6 of an egg. Okay, so now we're getting somewhere close. Okay, so Shulchan Aruch, what does the Shulchan Aruch says? Now then, this is where it gets interesting, the language of the Shulchan Aruch. You have to understand how the Shulchan Aruch speaks. The Shulchan Aruch gives a psak. Why is the Shulchan Aruch got such power for us today? There was plenty other things that were written, other codexes that were written other than the Shulchan Aruch. Why did Rabbi Yosef Karo have the mazel to be the one that, Shulchan Aruch, whoa, I'm a Shulchan Aruch Jew, right? I keep everything in the Shulchan Aruch. We don't, by the way, but why? Why is it mazel? Okay, it took hold, right? Why did the Beatles, Lahavdil, take hold, and some other skiffle group in the 60s from Liverpool didn't? Mazel happened to be the right place, the right time. Shulchan Aruch was very well regarded, and then became the, and this is part of the problem, is the Shulchan Aruch became Torah Shebichtav. Once you write something down and accept it as the definitive opinion, it's very hard to break that. So what does the Shulchan Aruch say? Now, we have to look at the language of the Shulchan Aruch. The Shulchan Aruch gives his opinion, and then sometimes what he says is, you know what? There is another opinion. Yeah. Yesh omrim. Others say. There are some that say. That's the Lashon of the Shulchan Aruch. Look what he says. This is, by the way, the smallest chapter in the Shulchan Aruch. And he says, regarding the amount of a kazayit, yesh omrim ke chetzi beitzah. Yesh omrim. There are some who say, and of course that has been interpreted to mean that the Shulchan Aruch himself says, in the same way as you had inflation from the Rambam who said it's less than a third, to it's a little bit less than a third, to it's a third. You've now got the Shulchan Aruch who says there are some say, and I mean, I'm imagining Rav Yosef Karo laughing his head off there in front of his, in front of his olive tree. He takes his olive and he says, and he writes down, Yesh Omrim, Shekazayit Chetzi Kabetza. Ha, ha, ha. Do me a favor. And that's become understood by some that the Shulchan Aruch says that a kazayit is half an egg, which is, of course, why the Mishnah Brura says, mess around with the Shulchan Aruch. We need to take the most machmir position because this is a dioraisa mitzvah. Okay, half an egg. Okay, right. Now, by saying some say, it implies a minority view, but that's not how it's written. Right. Now, so how do we get to where we get to from the Ashkenazim? So Rabbi Yaakov Yisrael Kanievsky writes that the fruit has become weaker and smaller, and we had much larger. We've shown that that isn't the case. We've also shown that the eggs are not shrinking. The Ri says it was half an egg, and then we got the Mishnah Brura says it's a whole egg. Why a whole egg? Because half an egg, well, you don't quite know what a half. Better be sure and do the whole thing. And so there you go. So, but we come back to where I started, and that is Reb Chaim of Volozhin. Reb Chaim of Volozhin is somebody who you can certainly rely on, right? He's a Jewish man, right? He can be relied on, and he said an olive is an olive. And he went according to the Geonim. The Geonim predate the Rishonim, both of Ashkenaz and Sfarad. And so, interestingly enough, there is a position that Reb Chaim Kanievsky said that at the seder of Ish, he, the Chazon Ish, allocated portions that were 17 cc, much less than 17 cc. Much less, bigger than still 3 times the size of an olive, but nevertheless, when we say, oh, a Chazon Ish Shia, and we think, oh, massive, not so, according to Reb Chaim Kanievsky. Now, so what you're going to tell me now is you're going to tell me all of those things that you've said, all very nice, Lieberman, but halacha is canonized. And once you've got a halacha, you can't change it. Halacha is a kazayit is whatever figure it is you decide, and you can't change it. And in some circles, that is true. In some, and if that's what you believe, that you cannot change any halachot at all, then you would not really be doing many of the things that you would have done back then, right? That you do now, you wouldn't have done. So it's not a consistent position, to be honest. But there are those that say you cannot mess with Masorah. Masorah is this and that's that. It's complex. It's a complex issue as to whether the halacha is dynamic or whether the halacha is static. As those of you who've been in my shurim before will know, this is probably my biggest for teaching, is that I believe with every fiber of my body that the halacha needs to be dynamic, and it has always been dynamic, and it should continue to be dynamic. How dynamic it should be, how long's a piece of string, that's up to you. But I firmly believe that it should be dynamic. I firmly believe in the concept of authentic Judaism, which is why I wear tchelet, which is why I call my organization tchelet, because we have an opportunity to do that mitzvah authentically now, which we never had for 1400 years after we lost the ability to die. We then got it back in the middle of the 20th century. And it's the most beautiful thing to be able to do a mitzvah that for 1500 years we couldn't do. That's why I wear tchelet. And that's why I believe personally that we should use the measurement of the Geonim, of the kazayit being what was obviously meant was a kazayit. So that's my view. There are those who would say, reform, Lieberman, you know, you can't do that. You can't go against the Mishnah Berurah. You can't go against, and to those people, I will just say 3 words, Reb Chaim Volozhin. Right? I can rely on him. He's a reliable authority. So let's finish off by showing you something which you may have already seen. I certainly had one of these in my previous existence, which some of you will know I had in my previous life. Okay, suffice it to say that I used to wear a black hat. A shiur sheet. Okay. Yeah. You have anybody seen these? I had one that was all different colors. I printed one out, but I've only got a black and white color. This is the one that you'll be remembering, right? This was orange and red. Yeah. You can still buy them online if you want one from Eichler. They're still available online. If I'd have had a color printer, I would have printed it out in color. But anyway, I printed this one because it's easier. But of course, I have had to extend it because when you print it out, it doesn't come out at real size. So what I'm going to show you now, if you'll just give me another 5 minutes of your time, is the shiurim that are on this sheet, which are recognized, inverted commas, by the Machmir Poskim. Okay. Now, the blue, let me show that first of all to the guys on the recording and the screen. The blue is matzah and for afikoman, which is a deoraita for the matzah and durabanan in place of a deoraita for the afikoman. Okay, the blue square. Now, Jonathan Raymond very kindly brought me some matzah, and we can see. Oh, look at that! Look at that! Absolutely made to measure. So, according to this, you need to eat for a kazayit a whole sheet of matzah, right? Okay. I didn't write it.
Crushed it up and figured it out.
Okay, so that is according that it will be like probably, I don't know, 30 or 50 cc. I've not measured it, but that is a shiur, not less than that, according to we're going to call it the Eichler chart, just because you can buy it from Eichler, right? That is the Eichler shiur, right? Okay, now, if you are talking about maror, it's the green. So all that whole square of maror, right? I happen to bring some of this. By the way, I'm not sure I can use this for, I've not looked this up. This occurred to me today as I was picking this. I picked this from my balcony. My wife grows hydroponics. So this is hydroponically grown lettuce. The bracha for which is shahakol. So I'm not sure. I need to, don't quote me on this. I haven't looked it up and I haven't discussed it and I haven't thought about it. It only occurred to me this morning at 7:45 before I left for shul. I'm not sure whether we can use this because it's not hadama, it's shahakol. But anyway, let's assume it was regular lettuce. And you would need to have to cover this entire thing. Right? This entire, you would need to have 3 leaves of, no, I'm not being facetious here. Those of you that want to stick with the Eichler method of thing, which is, yes, Mark, you want to stick with that?
I just want to tell you that when I married Shoshana, her grandfather was a rabbi in Lakewood. And we used to go to seder there. Each seder would take 3 days. The amount of matzah the grandfather would eat. And he had that chart. That's the chart. And he would sit there, and sit there.
Okay, et chata'ai ani maskir hayom. So did I. I also had the orange and red chart, and I was there meticulously measuring it out and giving it out to the whole seder. It took forever. And not only that, it was difficult to eat. Okay, so 3 good sized leaves will cover that. Right now, if you're on stalks of lettuce as opposed to leaves, then it's a bit smaller. It's the purple. Right, the purple one of the stalks. Now, For Korech, they're very makel on Korech because Korech is only Zeichel and Mikdash Kehillah, and they allow you basically a half of the shiur. Why? Because you've got to do it twice over. So half of a matzah for Korech, full matzah for Afikomen. Right, now then, if you want to be like the Chofetz Chaim, you can probably double that. Okay, or at least another half on top. Okay, you want to be like the Chofetz Chaim. If you want to be like Reb Chaim of Volozhin and the Geonim, then it is. And well, we don't know what the Rambam says, but we're assuming the Rambam as well, yeah, because the Rambam didn't say anything because it's obvious. If you want to be like them, then you're talking about a kazayit, an olive. Now, how much is an olive? Now, we have said that you could get 4 of these or 5 of these up to the 20 cl line if you crushed them up. Now, let's just have a little experiment and see how much matzah we can get into there, right? Brought this in so I won't make a big mess. Let's just crunch all this up. Okay, let's just crunch this up.
This is, oh, okay, ready. Okay, and it's no.
Okay.
Use them.
Right.
Use them.
So I've got this as crunched up as I can, and I need to get. So what have I taken to crunch this up? I've taken about a third. Taken about a third of a matzah in my hand now, right? So I've got a third of a matzah, of a machine-made matzah, way over. Okay, so we've got to get to, you know, about a quarter of that, probably about that much. Okay, now, so if you were to take that much matzah, that would be your regular kazayit. And if you want to know, somebody clever has worked it out. If you want the non-Eichler chart, okay. I once went to a shiur given by Natan Slifkin, who's researched all of this. A lot of this material is his, by the way. And he came up with a chart of his own for a kazayit, and it was a picture of an olive. Okay. But he's worked out the volume. Somebody's worked it out anyway. That a kazayit is half the size of a credit card. Okay, half the size of a credit card is a real kazayit, and on our Eichler chart, I have done it in red for you. Okay, slide down. Okay, that there is the size of a kazayit according to Reb Chaim of Volozhin, the Geonim. Probably the Rambam and others. So you pays your money, you takes your choice. I just wanted to explain to you how we get, or they got, or we got, or whatever you want, to the various sizes that we want. So certainly, if you like matzah, there is no harm in you eating more than a kazayit. Nobody's stopping you. If you don't, or if you're poorly, and if you think it's foul, if you're sick, you have a problem with it, you can certainly rely, not on me, but you can rely on Reb Chaim of Volozhin and the Geonim, that amount of matzah will fulfill your obligation on Pesach.
How does it work for Morah?
And Morah is, well, let's do it. Let's do it. Let's take a bit of a leaf, right? Let's do it over here. Let's take a bit of a leaf, okay? And let's scrunch it up and put it in here. Our olive, remember, is a quarter to the line. So if we scrunch that up, right, probably about a quarter, agreed? Yeah,
Okay.
agreed, everyone? That's about a quarter of up to the line. So, take it out again. That much. Okay, that much is your maror.
If you do horseradish, the table, it's like a teaspoon or something.
It would be the size of an olive. Yeah,
Chazeret.
yeah. If you take that, yeah. So
To update your sheet for the youth of today, you don't know what a credit card is. You have to put Apple Pay.
yeah, yeah.
Okay.
The youth of today know what their father's credit cards look like. I can tell you. Okay, so everyone, there you go. That
Thank
is
you. Wow.
when an olive is not an olive. There you go.
That was very, very.